Hello, everyone. I'm Emily, the older sister of the person telling this story. I'd like to share with you a bit about our family and the complex dynamics that have shaped the way we relate to each other. Growing up, I was always the golden child in the family. My parents praised me for everything I did, whether it was my grades, my behavior, or even my marriage. It seemed like everything I did was exactly what they wanted, and I could do no wrong. In contrast, my younger sister, who I'll call Jane, never really seemed to live up to their expectations. From the start, there was a noticeable difference in how my parents treated us. While I received constant praise and attention, Jane seemed to be constantly scrutinized. Even though she was incredibly talented, smart, and independent, it was never enough. Our parents often compared her to me, and I couldn't help but notice the way they favored me, even though I never asked for it. To them, I was their success story, and Jane, well, she was the one who could never quite meet their ideal. For the most part, I didn't think too much about it. I took advantage of the love and attention that came with being the perfect child. But as we got older, I started to notice how Jane's frustration grew. She began to withdraw from our family more and more, and I couldn't understand why. Why couldn't she just let things go and accept that this was the way our family worked? Why did she constantly challenge our parents' rules? I thought she was being difficult for no reason. Living under the same roof with Jane was always a bit tense. I thought we were getting along well, but now looking back, I see how much space I took up in our parents' attention. Whenever there was an issue, it was always Jane who seemed to get the blame. She never quite fit in, at least not in the way I did. She was always trying to get their approval, but nothing was ever enough. I, on the other hand, always seemed to get what I wanted, even without asking. We both lived in the same house, and for a while, things felt okay. I had my own life, and Jane did too. Though it seemed like she was often trying to find her place, the most noticeable source of tension was the way our parents would compare us, often unintentionally. It was subtle, but it was there. I knew they were disappointed in her, but I didn't understand why she couldn't just be like me, always getting along, always being what they wanted. Looking back now, I realize how unfair that was to her, but at the time, I didn't see it. At one point, my parents decided to have Jane and I share a room. I didn't think much of it at first, but it soon became clear that Jane wasn't happy about it. She didn't want to share her space with me, and I didn't understand why. To me, it seemed like a small thing. But Jane, she was different. She valued her privacy, and I never really understood that. She wanted her own space, her own life, and in a way, she resented me for being the one who was always getting attention. We had our fair share of arguments, but there were times when I felt guilty for taking so much from our parents. Jane was always the one to get caught in the middle, and I was too naive to understand the impact it had on her. I thought we were just different people, but now I realize how much it hurt her, how much she struggled with the constant comparison and the expectations placed on her. My parents didn't see it. They never noticed how much Jane was suffering. They just assumed she'd come around eventually, just like I did. They thought if they kept pushing her, kept comparing her to me, she'd eventually see things their way. But it didn't work like that, and over time, things got worse. Jane withdrew further and further, and I was too focused on my own life to notice how much pain she was in. I wish I had done more to understand her, to see how different our experiences were growing up. I didn't know it then, but the more I look back, the more I see how our family dynamic shaped both of us in ways I never imagined. While I was basking in the attention, Jane was slowly being crushed under the weight of it all. It wasn't until much later that I started to understand the impact my parents' favoritism had on her. I was the good child, the one who did everything right. But Jane, she was always the one who didn't fit in, the one who didn't get the same level of attention. And yet, despite all of that, she always tried so hard to live up to their expectations. I realize now how much she sacrificed, how much she changed to fit into their mold, and how much it cost her. The truth is, our relationship wasn't as strong as I thought it was. I didn't understand her struggles, and she didn't understand mine. The divide between us grew wider, and before long, it felt like we were two completely different people, living in the same house but worlds apart. Looking back, I see now how wrong it all was. Jane never deserved the way she was treated, and I never should have stood by and let it happen. I was just a child, trying to survive in a family that was falling apart, but that doesn't excuse the way I acted. I should have been more understanding. more supportive of her. I should have seen that she wasn't just being difficult, she was hurting. Now, as an adult, I can finally see the damage that was done, both to Jane and to myself. Our family dynamic was broken long before we ever admitted it. I only hope that one day we can fix the mistakes of the past and rebuild what we lost. But for now, I'm just trying to move forward, to be a better sister and a better person, and to make up for all the things I didn't see when it mattered most. Everything started to change on one fateful day when I discovered a shocking truth. It was a typical afternoon, and I had no idea that my life would be turned upside down. My parents accused my younger sister, Lynn, of having an affair with James, my husband. They claimed to have found inappropriate messages between the two of them and demanded that Lynn leave the house immediately. I was completely stunned and couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could they accuse her of something like this? Lynn had always seen James as a brother, and I never suspected anything else between them. When my parents insisted that Lynn leave, I felt a rush of confusion and anger. How could they do this to her? Lynn had always been a caring and respectful person, and the idea that she could betray me or my family was incomprehensible. I tried to talk to her, but my parents wouldn't allow it. They were convinced she had done something wrong and refused to listen to her side of the story. I could see the hurt in Lynn's eyes as she packed her things and left. I tried to stop her, but there was nothing I could do. She left without any explanation or opportunity to defend herself, and I was left in an emotional whirlwind. In the days that followed, my mind raced with questions. How could my parents accuse Lynn of something so terrible without any solid evidence? Why would they jump to conclusions so quickly? I found myself questioning everything about my family dynamics, and I could no longer ignore the growing sense of unease in my chest. I kept wondering if I was missing something. Maybe my parents knew something I didn't? But every time I tried to reach out to Lynn, they dismissed her explanation as meaningless. They were firm in their stance, and their accusations felt like an impenetrable wall that I couldn't break through. It was painful to see them reject my sister, and it left me feeling powerless. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. My parents were adamant in their accusations, but I had known Lynn for years, and I refused to believe that she would do something like that. It didn't make sense. The messages they claimed to have found didn't add up to what I knew of my sister and James. Still, I couldn't ignore the tension in my home. My relationship with James, already fragile due to the pressures of daily life, began to crack. I started to grow suspicious of everything around me. Why were my parents so sure of their claims? Were they trying to manipulate me into turning against Lynn? Or was there some truth in their accusations that I wasn't ready to see? The more I thought about it, the more conflicted I became. James, too, seemed distant, and I began to notice little things that didn't sit right with me. His sudden withdrawal, his guardedness whenever I brought up the situation with Lynn. I tried talking to James, hoping for some clarity, but he denied everything. He assured me that there was nothing between him and Lynn, that he was completely innocent, but the more he denied it, the more suspicious I became. There was an odd, subtle shift in his behavior that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't like the James I had married and spent years with. His unease around me grew, and I started to question if maybe he was hiding something. Despite the growing tension between us, I wanted to trust him. After all, we had built a life together, and I wanted to believe that he wasn't capable of betraying me. But as the days went on, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. When my parents pushed Lynn out of the house, I felt torn between loyalty to my family and the growing realization that I didn't fully trust my husband anymore. It wasn't long before the situation escalated. Lynn, who had left the house in a hurry, started reaching out to me again. She seemed desperate, trying to explain herself and clear her name. But my parents' words echoed in my mind, and I didn't know who to believe anymore. The more Lynn tried to talk to me, the more I felt caught in the middle of a battle that I had no control over. I couldn't help but wonder if I was being manipulated by both sides. Every conversation with James left me feeling more uncertain. I wanted to believe that he was innocent, that my parents were simply overreacting, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I was missing. As the tension between us grew, so did my fear of losing everything I had worked so hard to build. My family, my marriage, my sense of security, it all felt like it was slipping away, and I didn't know how to stop it. The more I tried to reason with James and my parents, the more they dug their heels in. No one wanted to listen to me, and I felt increasingly isolated. Lynn had been cast out, and James seemed distant and evasive. In the end, I was left with a shattered sense of trust, unsure of who to turn to or how to fix the mess that my family had become. What started as a simple disagreement had spiraled into something much darker, and I couldn't see a way out. This was the moment when I realized that the foundation of my life, my family, my marriage, was built on fragile ground. The accusations, the secrets, the lies. It was all too much. And as the walls closed in around me, I had to confront the truth. Nothing would ever be the same again. After my sister Jane was kicked out of the house, I started to have doubts about everything. One day, I discovered something shocking. Not only was James involved with my sister, but he also had a complicated personal life outside of our family with multiple other women. I was completely blindsided when I found out the truth about James, someone I had always thought of as the perfect husband. After facing this truth, I decided to dig deeper to understand what really happened. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that I had also been lied to by my parents for a long time. It all started when I found some strange messages on James's phone. He had saved one of his mistress's numbers under my name to avoid suspicion. This revelation made my heart drop. I had always trusted him, never once questioning his loyalty. But now, everything was falling apart. I found not only messages but also photographs of James with other women, things I had never imagined would be a part of his life. It was as if the man I had married wasn't the person I thought he was at all. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe it was a misunderstanding or perhaps there was a logical explanation. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized that these weren't just random mistakes or innocent situations. They were intentional, deliberate actions to deceive me. James had been living a double life, and I had been completely unaware. The discovery didn't stop there. As I dug deeper into the situation, I found emails between James and my father discussing various financial transactions, some of which seemed very suspicious. There were mentions of offshore accounts, fake investments, and other illegal activities that I never could have imagined. It seemed like everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. The hardest part was realizing that my parents, who I had always trusted, were involved in these schemes as well. They had been hiding the truth from me for years, covering up James's affairs, and even participating in these shady financial dealings. I had thought that my parents had always been there for me, that they were the ones who would protect me, but now I saw how they had been enabling James and his actions all along. The pain of this realization was overwhelming. I felt utterly betrayed. I decided to confront my parents, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they would deny everything or try to manipulate me into believing that I was imagining things. I had always been the golden child in the family, and they had always praised me for being perfect, while my sister had been the one they criticized. But now, I was beginning to see how toxic that environment was. My sister Jane had always been the one they pushed aside, and I had never noticed how much it hurt her until now. My parents had been playing favorites for so long that I never realized how much damage it had caused to all of us. When I finally sat down with my parents and confronted them about everything I had discovered, their reactions were exactly what I feared. My father was defensive, denying everything, and my mother seemed to have no idea what I was talking about. It was as if they had been living in a completely different reality, one where their actions were justified and their lies were acceptable. They tried to manipulate me into thinking that I was overreacting, that I was being too harsh on James, but deep down, I knew the truth. I felt betrayed not only by James, but also by my parents, who had spent years feeding me a false narrative. They had manipulated me into believing that everything was fine, that our family was perfect, when in reality, everything was built on a foundation of lies. The weight of this discovery was crushing, and I didn't know how to move forward. The more I learned, the angrier I became. How could they have kept this from me? How could they have allowed me to live in this false reality for so long? I began to question everything, my marriage, my family, and even myself. How could I have been so blind? How could I have trusted them all so completely when they had been deceiving me the entire time? It was clear that my relationship with James was irreparable, but the damage with my parents was even more profound. I didn't know how to forgive them for what they had done. They had betrayed me in a way that I couldn't even comprehend. And now, I had to face the fact that everything I thought I knew about my family was nothing more than a lie. As the days passed, I started to feel more isolated. I couldn't confide in anyone. There was no one left to trust. My sister had been hurt by this same family, and I had failed to see it. I was left to navigate this overwhelming situation on my own. But the one thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't stay in the same toxic environment any longer. My life was shattered, but somehow I had to find a way to rebuild it. After discovering the shocking truth about James's and my father's involvement in illegal financial dealings, I knew I couldn't just stand by any longer. I couldn't let them continue to manipulate and ruin both my life and my sister Jane's. Despite the complex history between Jane and me, I knew that I had to take a stand. I realized that I could no longer stay silent and allow my family's toxic actions to go unchecked. Even though I had been part of this family for years, I felt that it was time to unite with Jane to face the truth and protect what remained of our integrity. When Jane was kicked out of the house, I felt guilty. We had been estranged for so long, and I hadn't been there for her. The more I thought about it, the more I understood how much I had failed to support her, especially knowing now that she had been wronged. This realization pushed me to do the right thing, no matter how hard it was. I decided to reach out to Jane and start working together, as we had both been victims of manipulation and lies. We began gathering evidence on James's and my father's illicit financial transactions. It was an emotional and exhausting process, but we knew that if we were going to expose the truth, we had to dig deeper. As I reviewed the documents and messages Jane had uncovered, I was floored. James and my father had been involved in money laundering, offshore accounts, and shady business deals for years, and I had been completely oblivious. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I had always seen my father as a hard-working, respectable man, but the more I uncovered, the clearer it became that my father had been living a double life. He was deeply involved in illegal financial schemes with James, using shell companies to hide money from taxes and investors. Everything I had thought I knew about my family was beginning to unravel before my eyes. Working with Jane, I was able to see just how deep the deception went. We discovered email chains between James and my father, detailing transactions that appeared to be fraudulent. Some of these were linked to a series of shell companies they had created together to launder money. As shocking as it was to see the hard evidence, I felt a sense of determination. I couldn't let this go unchallenged. Not when so many lives were at stake, including my own. What shocked me even more was how my parents had been covering for James all these years. They had hidden the truth from everyone, including me. My father, who I had always believed in, had been using his position of trust to exploit the family's resources for personal gain. I began to see that my parents had not only manipulated me, but had also used their power to suppress the truth. They tried to paint themselves as innocent victims, but their actions were far from that. Through it all, Jane and I grew closer. We started to see the situation from a new perspective, as allies rather than rivals. I realized that, despite all the years of tension between us, we were stronger together. The bond we had always shared had been clouded by manipulation and favoritism from our parents, but now we could focus on the truth. I found myself standing by her side, determined to uncover every last detail of the truth and make sure my family could no longer hide behind their lies. As we gathered more information, I began to feel a sense of empowerment that I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just standing up for myself anymore. I was standing up for Jane and for the truth. We both knew that confronting our parents would be difficult, but we were willing to do it. Together, we had the power to fight back against the years of manipulation and control they had subjected us to. We reached out to Bob, our grandfather's lawyer, who had always been a source of support in the family. Bob was more than willing to help, and he advised us to be strategic. We knew that if we were going to expose our parents' actions, we needed to have everything in place. We spent countless hours working with forensic accountants, reviewing the evidence, and preparing for what would come next. Jane and I had become a team, and I felt more determined than ever to bring the truth to light. While the journey ahead was still uncertain, I knew that we were on the right path. The trust that had been broken within my family could never be fully repaired, but by working together, Jane and I could start to rebuild our own lives, free from the manipulation and lies that had held us back for so long. This was our time to take control and stand up for what was right. In the aftermath of everything that had happened, I found myself in an intense and painful battle, one that would force me to face the harsh realities of my family and my marriage. The truth was finally coming to light, and while I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, I was also burdened by the weight of the consequences. After a thorough investigation, it became clear that my father and James had both been involved in serious financial crimes. Em and I worked tirelessly with our lawyer and the FBI to bring the full extent of their wrongdoings to the surface. It wasn't easy. Every step of the process was riddled with difficulties and dangers, but I knew it was necessary. As much as I wanted to shield my family from the fallout, I had to do the right thing. This was about justice, and it was bigger than anything I had ever experienced before. But there was a part of me that couldn't help but feel guilty. I should have recognized the truth sooner. I should have seen the signs and acted earlier before it all spiraled out of control. The fact that I had allowed myself to be manipulated by James and my parents, that I had let them convince me to stay silent and ignore the obvious, weighed heavily on my conscience. I had failed in ways that were hard to reconcile with myself. The guilt was suffocating, and I couldn't shake it no matter how hard I tried. At the same time, there was a part of me that felt proud of the decision I had made to stand up for what was right. I was doing the right thing, even though it meant betraying the people I loved and confronting the painful truth about my own family. It felt like a constant tug-of-war within me, between the overwhelming guilt of my inaction and the relief of finally uncovering the truth. I had spent so many years in the dark, believing everything was fine, only to realize that I had been deceived by the very people I trusted the most. Throughout all of this, my mother's actions continued to make me question my own resolve. She was relentless in her defense of James, refusing to accept that her own husband and son-in-law were involved in these crimes. She couldn't, or wouldn't, acknowledge the truth. Her attempts to manipulate me into feeling guilty for my decisions were constant, and it made every step of the process even more painful. My relationship with her was strained beyond recognition, and it hurt to see her so blinded by her love for James that she couldn't see the damage he had caused. She kept telling me that I was making a huge mistake, that I was tearing apart the family, that I would regret it. She tried to guilt-trip me into backing down, into pretending everything was fine so we could all move on. But deep down, I knew that was never going to happen. I couldn't turn a blind eye anymore. The damage had been done, and I had to face the truth. This wasn't just about my family. It was about doing the right thing for myself and for the future. The conflict inside me was overwhelming. On one hand, I had my family, my marriage, my history with James, and my parents. But on the other hand, I had the truth, the undeniable facts that I could no longer ignore. I had stood by for so long, allowing myself to be manipulated and lied to. But now, standing up for the truth came at a high cost. The consequences would be severe, and I had no way of predicting where it would lead. I knew that I would lose everything that I had once held dear, the trust of my family, my relationship with my mother, the stability I had once known. But I also knew that if I didn't act now, I would never be able to live with myself. I could never look at my children, my sister, or myself in the mirror again if I didn't stand up and do what was right. Despite all of the conflicting emotions, I continued to move forward with the legal process, working with our lawyer and the FBI to make sure that James and my father would be held accountable for their actions. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I felt like I couldn't keep going. The pressure was immense, and the emotional toll was devastating, but I kept reminding myself that it was the only way forward. The alternative was to live with the consequences of ignoring the truth, and that was a price I wasn't willing to pay. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the fact that this whole situation had torn apart my family. I had lost my marriage, my trust in James, and my relationship with my parents. But more than that, I had lost my own sense of security and peace of mind. The person I had been for so many years, someone who believed in loyalty, family, and trust, was no longer the same. I had been forced to face a truth that had shattered everything I thought I knew. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't help but feel some sense of pride in the person I was becoming. I had made the difficult choice to stand up for myself and for what was right, even when it meant sacrificing everything I had once known. In the end, the truth had won out, and I knew that I could face the future with my head held high, no matter what happened next. This was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey, but I was determined to face it head on. No matter the consequences, I had to move forward. I had to rebuild my life and learn how to trust again. It wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to take on whatever came my way. In the end, the truth about James and my father came to light, and the consequences of their actions were severe. They were arrested for financial fraud and money laundering. The story of my family, once marked by betrayal, became a journey of seeking justice and reclaiming what had been lost. It wasn't an easy road to walk, but it was necessary for closure. While the relationship with my mother could not be repaired, a different part of the story unfolded. The betrayal I had once felt began to dissipate as I focused on the positive outcome. My relationship with my sister was restored. In the face of such turmoil, we found strength in each other. The bond between us became unbreakable, a reminder that even in the darkest times, family could still be a source of healing. The path to rebuilding trust and love wasn't easy, but we both knew it was worth fighting for. With the support of the FBI, we were able to expose the full extent of James's and my father's criminal activities. It wasn't just about punishing them for their crimes, it was about taking back the control they had stolen from us and, in a way, reclaiming the family we had once known. The FBI's involvement was instrumental in gathering the evidence and ensuring that justice prevailed. Their help was invaluable, and seeing them stand with us made me realize how important it was to do what was right, no matter the personal cost. As James and my father faced the legal consequences of their actions, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. It wasn't that I enjoyed their downfall, it was that finally, the truth had been revealed, and they would have to face the repercussions. The lies and manipulation that had held our family in their grip were finally being dismantled, piece by piece. But despite the success of the legal battle, the emotional toll was not easily forgotten. I had lost so much: my marriage, my trust in my parents, and my sense of security. However, through it all, I realized that justice wasn't just about punishing the wrongdoers, it was also about healing, forgiveness, and finding a way to move forward. My bond with my sister was a testament to that. In the aftermath of everything, we had become stronger than ever. The trust we had in each other, the shared experiences of pain and betrayal, formed the foundation of a new, resilient relationship. We had both suffered, but we had also learned to lean on each other in ways that made us unbreakable. While the road to healing was long, I knew that this was just the beginning. The experience had changed me, but it had also made me more determined to rebuild my life. I learned the hard way that family isn't always what it seems, but it's worth fighting for. I had lost one family, but I had gained another. Through it all, I learned that justice, no matter how delayed, always prevails. And in the end, the bond of true family, rooted in trust and honesty, was stronger than any betrayal. With my sister by my side, I finally felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew that together we could face anything. The truth had come out, and with it, the possibility of rebuilding not just our lives, but our sense of who we were as a family. And that, in itself, was a victory.